We get into the big details of stress. I'm just going to give you a roadmap. And before that, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. I am part of the Wellness and Work Life team at UA. You all know us through our programming and Wellbama health screenings. Um, but I do have a background in sport and performance psychology, more on resilience training, working with athletes, soldiers in the Army, as well as employees. And one of the things I love to start my presentations or classes with is just saying that I believe that everything is a performance. So whether we're just going to work on our normal day and it may feel like something that we're just doing on a daily basis, we are still expected to perform in certain ways, whether that is through our job responsibilities or how we show up throughout our day and our relationships with our coworkers, interactions with our families. So we want to make sure that we are at our best, and we're showing up as best we can in every single thing that we do throughout the day, at work and at home. And so I hope today you do get something out of this class as it pertains to stress that you can bring to your work, to your colleagues that aren't able to come today, and then also to your home life and your family, kids, parents, spouses, significant others. So let's get into what stress is. We'll talk a little bit about how stress can or may not be contagious. We'll talk more about that in just a second. And then the role that stress plays on our physical health and mental health, and how we can maybe change our perception of how stress shows up within ourselves to promote more connection, or use stress in a way that may not always readily come to mind or may not be the most automatic for you all. First, stress is a state of worry, mental tension caused by a difficult situation. This is the definition that is provided by the World Health Organization. That's the most widely accepted definition of stress. When we think about stress, we typically think of that kind of worry or physical state, mental state that's it becomes tense. It's not something that we want to be in. And it's caused by a difficult situation, a challenge, a barrier that we're facing, something that doesn't really go right, to begin with. We can also typically discuss it as something that we want to minimize or avoid. If you Google stress, the first page will come up with stress management techniques, how to avoid stress, the ways in which stress harms our health in general. And so there's just a very blanket understanding that, I think from whether we learned it or we were taught it in school or as we're growing up, looking at our health more, that stress is something that we definitely want to minimize, avoid, even in the media where we're talking about health and stress. It is typically presented as something that we want to decrease. We also may think of some stress as something that happens to us. When a situation arises, it feels like everything's being dumped onto us. And we typically will respond by saying, why is this happening to me? Or how is one more thing happening to me? And that kind of, it illustrates a picture that that we don't have any control over this stress. And while we may not be able to control every situation that we are in, we are able to control our response to that. So we'll get into that in a little bit later on in this presentation. But typically when we experience stress, it feels like something that's just happening to us that we have no control over. And then lastly, and this is one of my favorite things, ways to think about stress is that it just is something um, that you care about is at stake. The stress is feelings or ways that we look at situations when something that we care about is at stake. This definition or way of thinking about stress is one of my favorites because it's a little more broad and it doesn't place any like negative connotation on it as much as this first definition up here. And so I think it encapsulates a little bit more of how we want to think about stress in a way that could potentially help us in the future or as we're going through a difficult situation. So it's just something that you care about. You're about to do something that you care about, or something that you care about could potentially still stay with you, but it can be in a stressful situation. Um, so now I want you to get your phone ready, and I'll also send this link in the chat. But I want you all to think back to a time in the recent past that you were stressed. Something happened, or you're going through your day, and you felt like a kind of a big stressful moment. Think back to that time, put yourself in that situation once again. It may not be the most fun, but I promise it is worth going to. So now take your phone, scan the QR code. It's going to prompt you to put one or two words that you associate with that stressful situation, more specifically in how this stress came up in your physical and mental state. So what does stress look like and feel like for you? You can scan the QR code or you can follow the link in the chat. Feel free to add a couple words. It doesn't have to be just one. And I'll pull up what everybody is saying so we can see it anonymously. Okay. So I see a lot of anxiety, overwhelm, worry, exhaustion. Yeah, a lot of mental or psychological responses. I see headache, scared, concerned, chaotic, sad, overwhelming. Isn't it looks like a big factor for people. I also see like pit in stomach, breath holding, sweating. Yeah, chicken with the head cut off. Yes. Funny picture in my mind, but I think that definitely illustrates maybe how like your thoughts are just all over the place. You have no direction. If you're taking action, it doesn't make sense. Okay. Yeah, these are all heavy, but really good examples of how stress can show up in your body, mentally, physically, hard to breathe, sick. Yeah. Okay. Let me get back to my presentation. So yes, this is all really intense ways of feeling stress, but it illustrates this classic example of how we think of stress and what typically we do want to avoid. We are looking at this fight or flight response. So when this stressful situation happens, we're in this moment, maybe something is at stake that we care about, or something arises that's putting some tension on us. All of those things that you just inputted into that word cloud is the classic fight or flight response. And that's exactly what we think of when we think of stress in general. So when we are faced with this challenge, this fight or flight response is just a natural response that our body automatically induces in us. When we perceive something is at stake, or when we perceive a stressful situation in our minds, our minds are telling our bodies to get ready to either fight or flee from this situation. And this is, again, just a natural response. So while we can't necessarily control how our body responds mentally and physically, we can respond in certain situations in other ways. But before we go into that, I just wanted to highlight a little bit more about the fight or flight response because, again, it is a natural way of responding to stress, especially if it feels very overwhelming. So our pupils might dilate, our breathing increases, we may start sweating a little bit more, which I saw in that word cloud from you all earlier. Our heart rate increases, our cortisol releases, increasing our blood pressure and our blood sugar. Our immune system decreases. Our adrenaline is released. Muscles are tensed a little bit more. We're releasing glucose. Our digestion stops. Our brain is just ready for action and firing. Our neurons are firing. Our urine production may stop or slow, and our oxygen, nutrients, and blood flow, it may be shunted just to our muscles. So all of this is potentially going to happen when you're in that situation, in that fight or flight response, and there's a reason for it. Again, we are getting ready for our bodies to either fight this response, fight this stressful situation, or run away from this stressful situation. And so when we look at it just as not subjectively, but we see our breathing is going to increase because our heart rate is increasing. Our heart rate is increasing because our bodies are trying to get more oxygen and sugar to our muscles and our brain so that we can get ready to take action. Our pupils are dilating so we can take in more light so we can see clearer. Our muscles are tensing so that we can get ready for that action again with adrenaline. Our digestion slows, our urine production stops because we're trying to conserve energy to deal with this stressful situation. So in a biological sense, this makes sense. But when we're in a chronic stressed state, if we are constantly in this fight or flight response, there's going to be some pretty serious physical and mental health effects that we can feel over time. And so the role that stress has on our well-being, or the effects that it has on our well-being, if we're in this fight or flight response for an increased amount of time and we're not able to get out of it, or that stress is just piling on top of each other, we're going to feel this increased inflammation. We're going to be at a higher risk of heart disease, chronic pain, maybe more metabolic disorders like diabetes, or glucose resistance, insulin resistance is going to come up. Our immune system is going to be weakened, so we may be sick more often. And then we can also feel these mental health effects, detriments, increased anxiety, higher risk for depression, trouble sleeping because our mind is racing, difficulty concentrating, decline in memory. So as you can see, if we are in this chronically stressed state, these health effects are going to affect our daily lives. And so this is why we always hear that stress is bad, or we have to deal with stress in a more productive way, minimize stress, avoid stress, because there are real implications of stressful situations or a stress response that we are chronically in. So with that out of the way, because we are talking about the upside of stress and connection and contagious stress today, the big question that I want to answer is stress contagious? So in the chat, answer this question based on your own experience, based on what you have heard. Let's see what people are saying. Okay. I see yes, overwhelmingly. 100% yes. Gracie says. Hannah says it definitely is for me. Yes, yes, yes. I see Eddie knows. George says it can be in a good way. He might be able to teach this class. Yes, yes, I think so. Okay, so I'm not seeing any no's, and I'm seeing all yeses, and some people it seems like have some personal experience with the stress connection and contagion, which I definitely understand. Danielle says depends on the person. Yeah. So today we are going to talk a little bit about the stress contagious part. Then we're also going to talk about how it might not be as contagious as we think. So while we're answering this question, you may be thinking about this person that is always stressed out, that comes into your life, and that just overwhelmingly tells you, yes, stress is contagious. I know this one person in my life who constantly calls me and stresses me out because they're stressed. Or you might just hear from other people that you don't want to be in this stressful situation because you're going to be even more stressed out. We also hear just like what typical stress is like or how we should avoid stress from the media. We also hear that stress can be contagious from news or from articles that we see. So I pulled together a couple things just as I was looking at some resources online. If you Google stress, it comes up with all of those stress management techniques. If you Google, is stress contagious or can I catch stress? This is some of the stuff that comes up. So I threw in some treatment for stress. Is anxiety contagious? Protecting your own mental space. How stress can be harmful for your health. Stress at work is contagious. Try not to catch it. Stress is contagious. Here's how to catch it. So reading these things, you would absolutely say that stress is contagious, because this is what we're being told. This is what we're experiencing. So there's also a couple studies that have been done that asked people to observe someone in a stressful situation. So if you think about someone who is presenting and it's not going well, you can clearly see that they're visibly stressed. Hopefully you're not thinking about this presentation right now. But you can probably think about in the past, there is just someone who's presenting and they're stumbling their way through, or they are very uncomfortable. And you may have also felt that stress. If someone you see is stressed out, they're giving that presentation and it feels like it's going on forever and there's no way out, all you want to do is leave or just not feel as stressed as you are just sitting in the seat. And so that is depicted also in a couple other studies that have been done, that says that 26% of people in an empathetic stress test observed someone who, there are people who observe someone who is stressed out. 26% of those participants also said that they felt stressed out, and their cortisol levels actually did increase on their own. So they did self-report as part of the research, but they also did this cortisol. They did some scans just to look at the cortisol levels, and they said that was an increase in cortisol. So not that we are perceiving, not just that we're perceiving the stress is contagious, but our bodies are producing more cortisol, which is that stress hormone. So our bodies are physically reacting to somebody else being stressed out. So in a way, stress is contagious. A little bit more on that, affective contagious stress. So this describes the transmission of the psychological stress response. So again, if we're observing somebody going through this really stressful situation, maybe it's controllable, maybe it's uncontrollable, but we are also going to feel that stress. And then, as I just said as well, this physiological resonance or this physiological effect on us if we're observing someone or we have someone in front of us that is stressed out and they're discussing this stressful situation, our bodies are physically going to respond in that fight or flight response, and we are also going to feel that effect. In a broader sense, the ripple effect is also true. So when one person is stressed, and they're in a whole room and their stress response is toward that fight or flight, chances are this stressed out person is going to affect the rest of the group. So just like you would see if you threw a rock into a lake, you see the rock hit the lake and go into the water, and then you see the ripples come out from that spot where it hit into the water. We can think of contagious stress in the same way. Now, let's talk about the effects on this contagious stress mindset. So if we are so focused on stress being contagious and stress being something that we need to avoid, and those stressful people we need to avoid, if this is our only narrative that we know or we're taught or we experience about stress, chances are we are going to isolate ourselves. And it doesn't just come from people on the outside who are stressing us out. Sometimes if we believe that stress is contagious and we are stressed out, we don't want to take that stress to somebody else. So if we're experiencing a stressful situation and we're in this fight or flight response, we may feel like we need help, but we can't take it to certain people, or we may not feel like we can take it to anybody because we don't want to stress them out. We know that they're having a hard day. We know that they're going through their own things, and we don't want to take whatever we're experiencing to them because we feel like stress is contagious. If we're only thinking of stress as a contagious thing that we can pass to each other, chances are we're isolating ourselves, and that really does affect our relationships. They can become a little more surface level, and we can feel like we're isolating or we have more loneliness in our lives. And so if we are isolated, that affects our well-being. And interestingly enough, isolation and stress have the same health effects. So this is the exact same slide that I presented you a couple slides ago on stress and well-being, but isolation and well-being also have the same health effects. So if we are isolated, our physical health is going to take a toll. We're going to be at higher risk for certain diseases. We're going to have more chronic pain. We're going to have more inflammation and a weakened immune system. We're also going to have an increased anxiety, higher risk for depression, trouble sleeping, and difficulty doing the daily tasks that we need to do. And so if we're in a heightened state of stress all the time in that fight or flight response, we're going to see these health effects. And if we believe that stress is contagious, and we're isolating ourselves and not leaning on our support, we're also going to see these health benefits. So it feels like, what do we do at this point, right? Because no matter what we decide, if we give into the stress, we're going to feel these effects. But if we try to lean on the stress and lean on our people, we may stress them out, and then it's just going to get worse. Or if we keep it to ourselves and try to deal with it ourselves, we create isolation and also these health benefit or health effects. So what do we do? The good news is we are going to talk about that today, and that there are other ways to respond to stress. So when we're telling ourselves that stress is no big deal, stress is a big deal, and we're trying to avoid that stress, we're not learning about the other ways to respond to stress. Fight or flight is not our only option. Even if we're feeling those physical and mental effects of that fight or flight, like our heart rate increasing or sweating a little bit more, we can think about stressful situations in different ways. So one way to think about stress is the excite and delight response. So we've got fight or flight we just talked about. Excite and delight is what we talked about in our last class. But I'll briefly mention it here as well, because it is a great way to think about stress, and it has been researched to be a really, really effective way to deal with stress. Or to look at stress in another way and overcome these stressful situations. So excite and delight is choosing to think of stress as a way to grow, to learn. When we're in these stressful situations, we our bodies and our minds are responding to stress however they're going to respond. And it's up to us to think about these responses in a different way. So when our heart rate increases, it could mean that we're excited versus stressed out or anxious. When our muscles are tense and getting ready for action, it doesn't matter what action we're taking, but we're getting ready for action. So we might as well make it a more productive action, or an action that's going to help us get through these situations. So in this excite and delight response, it involves that cortisol, that stress hormone, but it also involves that adrenaline that we have as well, which gives us that same level of awareness and alertness in the fight or flight response. But we're going to be a little more open and curious to see what we can do about this stressful situation, or what we can learn in this stressful situation. So that's the excite and delight response. And another way that we can think of stress or respond to stress is the tend and befriend response, which is what we're going to dive into a little bit more today. So the tend and befriend response, again, it is the same physical response that we have in fight or flight and in excite and delight. But the tend and befriend response is just looking at a stressful situation and seeing the opportunity to lean on your social support, or build community, or also help community. So it can go both ways. If we're experiencing stress, we feel like we need the support, and we also feel like we need to help others in this stressful situation, or the stress response. And again, we're still releasing those same adrenaline, a little bit of cortisol. We're also releasing oxytocin and serotonin, which we'll talk about in just a second. But in that tender and befriend response, we're using the stressful situation to build community and build our response in a way that's going to be more productive. So tend and befriend can be triggered by our own need for support. So if we are in a stressful situation and we remember that stress isn't always contagious, and people are there to help you. If you have a really good social network, and you have this stressful situation that you feel like you need to reach out to them, definitely reach out to them, because this tendon befriend response will combat those contagious stress responses. And again, perceiving that a person or a community you care about needs help can also be part of your tendon befriend response. We have humans have a natural and impulsive way to connect. So if we think of stress as a way to connect, it's going to feel more natural. And it's also a source of resilience. So when we have a social support system that is going to help us out, we feel like we have the resources we need to overcome this situation and to face this stress, not in a fight or flight way, not in a negative way, but in a way to grow and to learn about ourselves, and stay motivated through the stress. So I did want to mention another study that I thought was really interesting about the tendon befriend response. It's from the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania. They put people in a workplace into two separate categories. One group was told that they had an unexpected windfall of free time and they could spend it however they wanted to. The second group in this workplace was told the same thing. You have an unexpected windfall of free time, but we want you to spend that free time helping somebody, find somebody to help. And it could be a really small way to help. This was, I think, like a 30-minute window, an extra 30 minutes. And so when they were given that time to do what they needed to do, their assignment, the two groups were asked to come back to work, finish their work, as well as fill out a self-assessment. And what they found, the researchers, was that the group that offered help or was given the responsibility to help somebody during this unexpected windfall of time, they came back more capable, competent, and felt more useful in their time left at work. So they had correlated that helping somebody allowed them to be more productive in their own work. They also felt like they had a little bit more of a handle on time pressure in certain deadlines. Even though they had the same amount of time as the group that could spend it however they wanted to. The group that helped somebody came back and felt like they were able to handle the time pressure of a deadline easier, which is interesting, I think, because when you're given just an unexpected amount of free time and it sounds great, you sound like it's like a great way to just relax or decompress or do some kind of like stress management technique, we may not come back as productive as if we were to go and help somebody. And so that just really illustrates the effects and the positive effects on the tendon befriend response. So the tendon befriend response works when we think of stress as a stress response, because of certain systems that go on physiologically in our bodies when we're responding to stress. So the social caregiving system is regulated by oxytocin. So when oxytocin is released as a response to this stressful situation, we feel more empathy, connection, our trust inhibits more of those fear centers. So when we feel more trust, we feel less fear or anxiety. And then it also and the inhibitors also center around where our brain produces or where we respond to courage. So we can also feel an uptick in like that confidence and courage to go for it, or we have the resources that we need to deal with a stressful situation. The reward system When our body releases the neurotransmitter of dopamine, we feel an increase in motivation, again, dampening fear, and also more optimism that we have the ability to do something meaningful. Dopamine also primes us for physical action. So when we are in this fight or flight response, we may feel like a chicken with our head cut off and we're ready for action, but that action um, is really, it's not directed at where we need it to be. But when we feel a little more of this dopamine and this optimism that we have the ability to do something meaningful, our actions are going to be more focused on providing support for this stressful situation or dealing with it in a way that's going to be way more productive. And then lastly, the attunement system is driven by the neurotransmitter of serotonin. So serotonin allows us to feel that connection with another person. We're feeling seen, understood, and valued. Our perception, our intuition, and our self-control is also enhanced. And we have an easier understanding of what is needed to deal with a stressful situation and the actions that have the biggest impact. So what we need to do that will help us get through this stressful situation in a way that's going to be the most productive. And so this is all great, right? We now know that there are 3 different ways that we can respond to stress. We can feel that fight or flight response. We can have that excite and delight response where we're looking at stressful situations as a way that we can be more open and curious about how we respond to it. And it's a way to grow and learn. We can also look at stressful situations in this tend and befriend response where this is a great situation where we can lean on our own social support, or we can go out into the community and help somebody and volunteer and feel all of this great dopamine and serotonin and all the things that our bodies enjoy. But how do we get there, right? How do we fight off that fight or flight response, that natural reaction or response to these physical feelings of the stress? And how do we make it more of our instinct? How do we turn our fight or flight response into more of a tend and befriend response, or more into that excite and delight response? First, we need to build awareness of how we respond typically in a stressful situation. So when we want to shift our response, we need to build awareness. We're going to make the invisible visible. We're going to look for opportunities and or role redesign. And then we're also going to identify our social support. So first step is building awareness. And you can write this down. You don't have to put it in the chat, but just take a second to reflect on how you typically respond to a stressful week at work. This could be feelings, it could be actions, it could be whatever you associate with a stressful week at work. How do you typically respond? I'm gonna give you just a couple minutes here. I think we go throughout our days and we're trying to get everything done that we have to get done, and so it's nice to have a second to reflect, especially when we're learning on how we can shift our perspective. Okay, and feel free to take all the time you need, write this down, come back to it later. But we're gonna move on to just one more question on helping you build awareness. So how do you typically respond to someone else's stress? And this again gets at that contagious stress piece. Think back to that one time where someone came into your office, or they called you on the phone and you were really stressed out. How did you respond? Again, thinking back to physically, verbally, emotionally, what did that look like? Okay, and there is no right answer here. This is, again, just about building awareness of how you typically respond. And I see a couple people putting it in the chat, which is great. And it looks like a lot of like take a walk, take a break, listen to music. Those are all really great ways to manage your stress. Going outside. I like some Morgan said sometimes they just need someone to listen. Great. So true. Depends on who it is. Sometimes I want to solve something for them. Sometimes I shut down. Yeah, remove yourself from that stressful situation. It stresses you out. Yeah. So all good to build awareness. And then on top of this, you can look at your response, look at what you wrote down, reflect on what you had thought about as you respond to someone's stress, and then look at how that affects your relationship or your interactions with this person. If you're shutting down or you want to remove yourself from the situation, but you work with them, you don't need to be best friends, but if you do need to work with them, that can get in the way of communication. It can get in the way of understanding each other. And then, of course, at home with family or friends, it can get in the way of your connection and your relationship. So first up, build awareness. We did a little bit of that, and I encourage you to continue to do that. Second step is to make the invisible visible. So when we are in a stressful situation, or we are experiencing stress in that fight or flight response, and we are able to recognize, okay, I'm really stressed out right now. I feel like I cannot deal with this. Look at how you typically respond and then name the response, name the stress, name exactly what it is that you are looking at, dealing with. Identify the physical state, identify how you're feeling. Just like we did, I had you write 1 or 2 words of how you respond to stress. This is a great way, again, to build awareness, but then it also provides like an anchor point for your stress. If stress is something that is just like up in the air, like a cloud over our heads, we're not able to anchor it to anything. But if we can name the stress and we can identify the physical state that we're in at the moment, it allows us to anchor in the present and not think about all the implications that come from this stressful situation and all the things we have to do about the stressful situation. This also goes back to this common humanity piece. So classic example of this is social media. When we're looking at social media, we are looking at a highlight reel of everyone. I think depending on your algorithm, it is getting a little bit better, but we typically see people's lives for how they want to present to the world. So we're looking at the best part of their life, their trips, their family, their friends, all the cool things they're doing. And it creates this isolation. It creates this feeling of maybe being behind or our life isn't as good. And that also promotes, the isolation and that lack of support. If we feel like everyone's life is better than ours, or they're more fulfilled, or they're happier, but if we can remind ourselves that this is just a highlight reel, or everyone has stressful situations in their life, we're not comparing our life to someone else's, but if we can remind ourselves that everyone is kind of in the same boat and we are all feeling stress in certain ways, this common humanity piece helps us feel like we're not so alone. And it also reminds us that we can acknowledge the stress in others and lean on them to build each other up and to combat the stress or to deal with the stressful situation in a way that is going to be more productive. So we want to create the concept and we want to feel like we're not so alone. Another piece to this, and more specifically acknowledging the stress in others, is that we want to remind ourselves of this concept of toxic positivity. So when someone comes to us with a stressful situation, or we catch ourselves trying to look on the bright side of every single thing, we're trying to say, well, at least we have a roof over our heads and at least we're not starving today. While that is great and it can provide a sense of gratitude, we are also we're not facing this stress or this situation head on. So if we're in this toxic positivity mindset where we're trying to solve things or provide that silver lining or make ourselves feel better and ignoring this situation or ignoring the stress, that's also not going to help us feel like we have the ability to choose our response and choose how we deal with this situation. Our third step is going to be look for opportunities. Okay. Look for opportunities and role redesign. So we want to prime our brain to notice opportunities to volunteer, reach out for others. If our response or our natural reaction is this fight or flight response to stress, and we kind of cave in on ourselves and isolate ourselves from others, that's not going to allow us to deal with this stressful situation and build our connections and build our social support. So we want to look for opportunities to volunteer, to reach out. This also allows us to produce more of those hormones that I talked about, more of that serotonin, that dopamine, especially if we're volunteering and we're giving back to others, that can counteract those stress responses from that, which can really help. Second, we can look at our job more specifically, and assign a little more meaning to our life. So we spend a lot of time at work, and I hope that you all find fulfillment in the things that you do, but that may not be every single day. And this isn't about rewriting your job description or changing the things that you do, but it's just thinking about your job and how it affects others, the impact that you have on other people. So I know a lot of us work with students. And however you found yourself in your role currently, reconnecting with that can help. Reconnecting with the impact that you have on a daily basis, because that is what's going to help us, again, look at these stressful situations that we're always dealing with. There's always going to be some kind of stress that we see in our lives on a daily basis, but reminding ourselves of the role that we have in our jobs, that means that it has meaning for us, or being a parent or being a caregiver, or doing the things that you do outside of work as well. Place more meaning on those. That's going to help us combat those stress effects if we're in this chronic stress state. And lastly, we can connect what we do to our values, which can create that extra satisfaction in our lives. Because when we're in this fight or flight response and we're looking at all the threats and the negative aspects, it can feel like we are disconnected from our values or disconnected from the life that we are trying to lead. So being able to connect to what we really value in our daily lives allows us to have this more open, tend and befriend response. And the last step in shifting our response from this fight or flight to the tend and befriend response is identifying your support. This also goes with the stress management techniques, but it's really, really important. So identifying who the people are that you can count on in your life through those stressful times. You know that they're going to listen to you. You know that they're going to provide solutions if you need them. You know that they are going to distill confidence in you, that you have the ability to do what you need to do to respond to the stress. Um, you can also discuss ways that you want to or need to be supported to create this mutual understanding. So once you identify your support, your people, you can tell them, I really just need to have someone listen to me right now, or I just need to work through this situation, but I also would like your input. This can help you feel more understood and create that common humanity, but it can also help you work through the stressful situation. And then just a reminder, utilize them, check in when you need. While stress may be contagious at times, it can also bring us together and allow us to have more community, more social support. So remember to use them when you need. And then I just wanted to highlight, because this is really important, the role of support. So, not only should you identify your support, but having people in your life that you can count on helps mentally and physically, with just our overall well-being. So it allows us to feel like our three basic psychological needs are met. The three basic psychological needs is from the self-determination theory in psychology and motivation. It directly relates to our well-being, our motivation, and our personal growth. And that those three psychological needs are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So when we feel like we are competent in what we're doing, we feel like we have ownership or autonomy over this thing, and we feel like we have the support we need, the relatedness um, to do whatever we need to do, we are going to feel well. We are going to feel like we are growing, and we are going to feel more fulfilled in our lives. Having stronger, meaningful connections also provides stability and predictability, which goes back to resilience. So if we are trying to bounce back from a challenge or dealing with a stressful situation, we want to have those connections that are stable and predictable, because we don't need anything else to have to provide more stress in our lives. And so we have strong connections. They allow us to be more resilient. And then just in general, social connection and social connection can boost our self-esteem, our confidence, and it can combat all of those those health effects from chronic stress that we may feel. So it's not that we are um, avoiding stress. We are not chronically in this fight or flight response all the time, and we're just trying to hold our head above water. But we have the opportunity to think about stress in a different way and build our connections so that we can be healthier in the long term, physically and mentally, because stress can also allow us to feel more community and build stronger connections that are more meaningful than those surface level connections that we may feel from isolation. And then last thing I wanted to mention is an app. It's called Sunny. Miranda and I just went to a conference last week on social connection, which was great. But it allowed us to find a couple different ways to build social connection. And one of the ones that I had found was Sunny. It's an app on your phone that you get. You do a self-assessment where you talk about the connections you already have, the connections that you want to work on, and then it provides you with different actions that you can take, talking points if you're trying to find more friends or do more hobbies that you can connect with people on. They're kind of like icebreakers, but they're gonna help you gonna help you find better connections, not just those surface level connections. So check that out if you're looking for a way to build stronger connections. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I don't think I missed any questions. I tried to watch the chat as we were going. But if you have any questions, please share them in the chat. You can also come off mute if you would like to ask a question live. We always love people having their cameras on and interacting live.